Lesson 4.9, Feature Writing, Writing the Nut Graph and Transition. Okay, so we see that we already have both docs open. We want both of these, both our original interviews. You might need to pull stuff from there, and our planning doc where we have our actual article together. And we're going to start, before we get into transitions, we're going to go up to the top and write our second paragraph of the article. There's still one more before this that we'll do at the very end. Our second paragraph of the article is called our nut graph. And if you remember when we talked about nut graphs, this is where we give the who, what, when, where, and why of the story in as few words, sentences as possible. And the thing that is most unusual in this story, the thing that really makes it an interesting feature article, is that we have a 10-year-old that's a sophomore in high school. So we want to start off with that. So I'm going to write the most interesting thing first. Oops, I have it highlighted green still. I'm going to take that off. And I'm going to say, at 10 years old, Tanisha Abraham has enrolled as a sophomore on campus. And now I'm going to look over here back at that information and see if there's information I need to include. I think right here we want to include maybe some of this, the youngest sophomore here. So I'm going to come over here and say, at 10 years old, Tanisha Abraham has enrolled as a sophomore on campus, comma, making her the youngest sophomore in the district's, oops, I had sophomore spelled wrong, in the district's history, comma, as well as the smallest at 4 foot 3 inches and 63 pounds. And this is a draft phase, so don't freak out if you make mistakes. Don't get hung up on them like I did. Now we have to decide what other information our audience needs to know right away before they can really understand the quotes. Because if we just jump from here to here, I still feel like there's some information missing. So looking over here, there's a lot of the info that I need. She was homeschooled the last 6 years. District officials said she could join 5th grade. But then she tested out and they said she could join 6th grade. So I need to include that info. So as you can see, I've added all the information here. We've got at 10 years old, Tanisha Abraham has enrolled as a sophomore on campus, making her the youngest sophomore in the district's history, as well as the smallest at 4 foot 3 inches and 63 pounds. And I added this. After 6 years of homeschooling, Tanisha's mother, Claretta Abraham, hoped to give her daughter more experience and enroll her in public school. District officials first directed her to Carter Elementary, where she would, made a little mistake there, where she would join other 10-year-olds in 5th grade until her mother suggested she be tested, and she tested on a 10th grade level. Tanisha, her mom, and the district officials agreed she could enroll on campus as a sophomore. Then we go into that first quote. So let's talk transitions. Before every one of these quotes, before the quote, we're going to need sort of a summary transition that leads into this quote, that leads out of the quote before and into it. So this is the art of writing in this. Everything else has been kind of plugging in information, moving quotes over. This is where you get to write. So for instance, when I look at this nut graph, we've got a lot of information here, but then we jump to hearing from a classmate. I need to have some sentence that transitions from here to a classmate talking that makes sense and helps the readers. So let's do that real quick. So I just added in here, classmates like sophomore Sylvia Keeling were shocked to find a 10-year-old sitting next to them in sophomore English. Now, if you notice the next quote then, I don't want it to be so repetitive, so this is super simple. All I'm going to do is remove these first two sentences of the quote because I kind of summarized them above. And then, it's a little trick, The quote works just perfectly. Classmates like sophomore Sylvia Killing were shocked to find a 10-year-old sitting next to them in sophomore English. Quote, I just thought she was tiny. I have two sisters who are 8 and 10, and I would have never guessed Tanisha was the same age as them. She's much more mature. And then I said, Tanisha's classmate Sylvia Keeling said, well, I've already introduced her up there, so I can just say Keeling said. One thing we'll need to do on these quotes is take this part and then move it after the first part of the quote. So I'm going to say Keeling said, quote, and I can take this part off. So there's our first transition and quote. Classmates like sophomore Sylvia Keeling were shocked to find a 10-year-old sitting next to them in sophomore English. I just thought she was tiny, Keeling said. I have two sisters who are 8 and 10, and I would have never guessed Tanisha was the same age as them. She's much more mature. Now, as I was looking to transition from this quote to this quote, I realized I need a little more information here because I don't quite know how to transition here. So that's when I'm going to go back to this document, look at my original interview, and all of a sudden, look here. Here was some extra information that we were going to summarize, and it's right before this quote, so I think this will work. Let's see what happens if we summarize that there. So basically I used the same trick as the last one. I went to the interview, I got some of the information beforehand, I used that and transitioned right into this next one, and it works great. I'm going to fix where the quote is, if you remember. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. So we're going to do comma quote Abraham. Because we have two people with the last name Abraham in this article, we're going to use the first name. Usually you would use just their last names. Tanisha said, I've watched all the, okay, good. And that quote's ready to go. Now, if you remember from the last video, these first two quotes we kind of decided were what's weird or unusual. So with the nut graph, these two transitions in the first two quotes, that first chunk of the article is basically done with the exception of our feature lead. So what I'm going to do now is transition from what's weird or unusual to the why section between those two quotes, and then from the why to the first day, and then to the end, and then we'll take a look at it. Okay, so I've added all my transitions in, and I used some things from over here to fill in those transitions, and some things I just kind of looked and came up with. So you can pause this and read through it, or you can read through the Google Doc itself. I have both of these available to you. But you can see that these transitions, some of them I borrowed from the first sentence to kind of make it work. Some of them required a couple of sentences, and a lot of them only required one sentence transitions, which is just fine. When I got down to the end here, I added the information, a little 2-sentence transition here about that PBS show, and then I still could not find a place for this quote here, but I'll show you what I'm going to do with that in the next video. So take a second to pause and read through those transitions so you can kind of see how they work, and then you can do that with your old article. We always end it. You don't have to write a closing. It just ends on a great quote. And I really liked it ending on this quote. Even though this quote's a little long, I feel like it was the perfect quote to end on. It kind of feels like it came full circle. Everyone is treating me like a normal kid, not some weird prodigy. That kind of goes back up to here, and that kind of feels complete and like the circle's ended. So be smart about what quote you choose to begin with and what quote you choose to end with.